I'm Alan Robarge, a relationship coach. Welcome to Improve Your Relationships, where I like to talk about attachment injuries and healing attachment trauma. And on this video, let's talk about why we freak out in romantic partner relationships. So why do we freak out in romantic partner relationships? And of course, let's explore what the heck do I mean by freak out, what is meant by that. I'm talking about a added intensity and a level of distress, anxiety, hyper alertness, this feeling that once we're in relationship, that the stakes are very high. There's an urgency. Now there's an aspect to this which is going to coincide with the feeling of falling in love, and that's going to make life feel a bit more vibrant. And we are aware that a number of processes are going on in our brain, and the hormones are surging through our bloodstream, and all of these different physiological processes when we first meet someone and we start entering a relationship are designed to enhance our experience of the courtship and the connection and feel a profound sense of falling in love, which I never quite understood where this comes from, this idea of falling, but nonetheless we understand that what I mean. So we're falling in love, and some of us who have a history, some kind of predisposition to insecure attachment that is rooted in some attachment injuries that have coded themselves into our nervous system as trauma energy and trauma responses. What this means is that we're much more, there's a heightened hypersensitivity to the closeness and the separation that we are experiencing in relationship. And for some of us, that closeness is very desired and we want more and more and more and more. And then for some of us, that intimacy and closeness, revealing vulnerability in that place is rather unsettling, and we need distance, distance, distance. So why is it that we can have our friendships, our work relationships, other family relationships, and for the most part, assuming that you don't have other things going on in your mind that you're working with, but let's say that, for the most part, there is a somewhat even keel, somewhat of a consistency where you're not freaking out with your friends. But when you're in relationships, you find that life has much more urgency and intensity, and maybe even it just feels like the stakes are higher. So what is going on here? So there's many, many things that are going on specific to your life and who you are, and of course I don't know what that would be. But something to explore that's potentially going on for many of us has to do with this idea that trauma is coded in the body at the level of activation. So let me repeat that. Trauma is coded into the body at the level of activation. And the gateway for attachment trauma to activate is vulnerability and intimacy. So if you have a certain level of vulnerability and intimacy with your friends, we can generically assume that many of us, there's this kind of hierarchy or degrees of intimacy and degrees of closeness that we have with friends, and that this idea, if we are dating someone, if we're in a romantic partnership, even if we get married and that's our spouse, there is an assumption that there's a deeper level of emotional connection, a deeper level of intimacy and vulnerability. And that is the gateway. That's the place where we enter connecting with the other person, and it's also the place where our trauma is stored. And so trauma being stored at the level of activation, if you think of this idea of a scale of 0 to 10, and we'll say that these attachment injuries and this unintegrated attachment trauma is looping in your body and looping in your mind. Oftentimes trauma energy is described as looping. and it has this repetitive quality to it. So if it had happened at impacted you at a level 9 or 10 intensity in your life, and you are in relationship with friends and family members from levels 0 to 8, it's not going to link up and activate that earlier trauma. The example that I like to give to make it more concrete is that of some type of accident. So when we talk about attachment trauma, we're more talking about covert developmental emotional trauma that happens over a period of time, which has a chronic component to impacting our nervous system and how our brains are mapped as far as our attachment style. But if we look more to some of the early traditional ways of framing trauma, which happens to be about the incidents, things that happen, specific incidents, and we could perhaps use a car accident. So let's say that you are in a car accident. It was very scary. It was a traumatic event. And you did survive because you're still here listening to this video. However, it coded itself into your nervous system in that level 9 or 10 intensity. And your body was not able to fully integrate the impact and was not able to discharge the trauma energy that got collected in your nervous system and was still part of your brain was on overload and not really able to make sense of it, and your nervous system was on overload and got overwhelmed by that experience. So let's say that some time passes, you manage to move on with your life, you manage to function, and you put the car accident behind you, and in a way the trauma goes dormant. It never fully was allowed to release itself from your system, but nonetheless you continued to live your life, and in a way you distanced yourself from that trauma. Your mind, your functioning through your maturing and living your life, you manage to move beyond it. And for all you're concerned, or from your point of view, you assume that accident, that car accident, no longer has an impact on you. So let's say 15 years later, you decide to go skiing in lovely Colorado. You're in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, and you're skiing, and you have a disastrous accident, and you almost run into a tree where it's almost inevitable that you would have died. And the moment is so scary, the moment triggers fear, the moment triggers a rush of adrenaline and other hormones, and in that moment, it is frightening, and you lost control. You almost fell off the side of a mountain and then ran into a tree. So in that moment, if I'm using that as an example, this idea, trauma is stored at the level of activation. That near-death experience 15 years later, after the car accident, would be on the same level of activation of, on a scale of 0 to 10, a 9 or 10 range of overloading your nervous system and blowing out your nervous system with this intensity of fear and this intensity of the adrenaline and the intensity of how scary this situation is. And that's how it links up. And it's that moment that your brain is flooded with that same level of activation that once happened when you were in the car accident, that all of a sudden, then in that moment, both of those traumas simultaneously are activated. You have the current experience, but now also you're linking it to what had happened 15 years ago because your brain had never been able to fully integrate what had happened. And it's very possible, and this is what we see a lot in doing trauma healing and trauma work, is that now this person in a way is simultaneously healing both of those at the same time, or needing to attend to both of those events at the same time. And it could be incredibly confusing, because many people often say, well, this doesn't make sense. Why is this so? Why am I having nightmares about the car accident? Why am I remembering the car accident? I thought that I dealt with that. I thought that that happened 15 years ago. And this is how trauma can go dormant. And when we are in a situation that links up or matches the same level of activation, it's going to wake it up and it will no longer be dormant. So now let's take the same example, but let's flip out of looking at a concrete incident-specific trauma. And now if we apply it to the realm of attachment and relationships, that is a bit more slippery. That's a bit more covert, because it's not necessarily just one moment in time like a car accident. It's just not one event like a car accident. We are talking about an emotional developmental trauma that has evolved over the years and impacted our nervous system by right of feeling some degree of being unsettled in fear, that we are feeling insecure about our attachment, the people that we're growing up with. And usually this happens when it can happen in adulthood, but usually it oftentimes happens by right of our childhood and our family system and our relationship with our parents. So we have this emotional developmental trauma that's made up of a series of attachment injuries, these moments of these missed opportunities where attention and where presence were not fully offered, and so that the child, meaning you, meaning me, our brain, our body was just not quite able to feel fully seen, known, heard, and understood. And there's some kind of chronic disruption and tension and confusion and a uncertainty that's happening in the family. It could be this uncertainty and tension between the parents. It could be trickling down into the relationships between the children and the parents. But there's some unsettledness that's happening, and it's coding itself in our brain as attachment trauma, which means our nervous system can get overloaded and overwhelmed, and we're unable to integrate and release the intensity of the fear that gets activated around vulnerability and around intimacy. So in that way, the thing that we want very much, the thing we want most, vulnerability and intimacy and connection, which are all the lovely, beautiful things that we need to build a relationship. Nonetheless, even though that's what we want, it turns out that those are the things that also activate our trauma, our attachment trauma. And back to this idea of trauma is stored in the body and in the mind at the level of activation. And in this context of looking at relationships, we're saying it's stored at the level of vulnerability. It's stored at the level of the depth of emotional connection. And so you can have a number of relationships in your life, and I'm just going to lump all those into saying, more of the friendship, the friend level, and that the level, the intensity of relationship, of relating, of vulnerability, connection, emotional availability to each other is operating between, we'll say, levels 1 to levels 8. And that you're totally fine. It's totally manageable. Your life, you can still orient in a reasonable range where there's not a lot of, extreme behaviors or extreme responses that's coming out of levels 0 to level 8. However, let's say you fall in love. Let's say now you're dating. Let's say now you're in a relationship. And now you are getting married. Now you're moving in together. And you love your partner. And you know your partner loves you. And you are moving into a more heightened range. And we're going to say levels 9 or 10 of caring, levels 9 or 10 of emotional connection, of intimacy, of vulnerability. Well, guess what? It is at that place, at that level, at that depth of emotional connection, that's where your attachment trauma is stored. So you simultaneously are wanting to grow in relationship and enjoy the beautiful benefits and enjoy the beautiful moments of being with your partner, and how wonderful and how nice it is that you're able to have this experience of connecting at level 9 and 10 of emotional openness and emotional availability, and you're sharing this very beautiful vulnerability with your partner. However, it's going to simultaneously activate your brain and activate the dormant attachment trauma that does not get triggered or come out when you are operating within the levels of 0 to number 8. And that's why we can say, well, why do we freak out? Why am I freaking out when I'm entering these romantic partner relationships? Because I'm not freaking out with my friends. Because trauma is stored at the level of activation. I hope that this was helpful. If you like this video and would like to see more just like it, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, heads up, I'm creating a community membership website called Improve Your Relationships. And if you'd like to learn more about that, get on the email list. It's launching soon, or perhaps over time with this video, perhaps it has already launched. But at any rate, get on the list if you'd want to join this community to talk to other like-minded people to explore these ideas. More videos to come. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.